Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the files on one of the absolute greatest historical cold cases humanity has ever seen. Seriously, get ready to have your preconceived notions about ancient history completely shattered. We're looking at a society so incredibly advanced, so uniquely peaceful, and honestly, so vast that it practically rewrites the entire rulebook on human civilization. So, let's dive in and unlock the mystery of the Indus Valley. Okay, to really appreciate this, we need to start with a little bit of historical hubris. Picture the 19th century. The British Empire is actively justifying its massive presence in India using this concept they called tolerant imperialism. The basic idea was that they were bestowing high culture and civilization upon the Indian subcontinent, right? Well, that pride was about to hit a massive reality check, because hidden literally right beneath their boots were the remnants of a highly civilized, perfectly organized society that existed right there in India some 5,000 years earlier. We're talking about a golden era of urban living that predated British civilization by millennia. To understand exactly how this reality check happened, let's travel back to 1829. Imagine trudging through the muddy swamps of the Punjab province alongside a guy named Charles Mason, a former employee of the East India Company. Mason documented his findings in his journals, noting he'd stumbled upon these vast ruins and strange remains. But here's the crazy part. He was completely unaware that he hadn't just found some old rubble. He had accidentally discovered the sprawling remains of Harappa, a cornerstone of an ancient world that had been utterly lost to time. Now, uncovering this wasn't an overnight thing. It was a slow burn over decades. Mason's findings eventually caught the eye of a British military officer, Sir Alexander Cunningham, whose fascination actually led to the creation of the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, in 1861. But the real earth-shattering breakthroughs didn't happen until the 1920s. In 1920, Indian archaeologist Dayaram Sahani began massive, targeted excavations at Harappa, and soon after that, another huge, sprawling city was uncovered 590 kilometers away, filled with skeletal remains literally piled atop one another. The locals chillingly called it Mohenjo-Daro, which translates to the Pillar of the Dead. Finally, in 1924, Sir John Marshall made the ultimate mic-drop global announcement. British India was home to an ancient civilization that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, Egypt and Mesopotamia. And to put that into perspective, just look at this number, 1,260,000. That is the staggering number of square kilometers this civilization covered. Stretching across parts of modern-day India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, it was vastly larger than its famous contemporaries in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China. We're talking about over 1,400 discovered sites, nearly 1,000 in India, and close to 500 in Pakistan. It's just a massive footprint. So how did they pull this off? Well, they built it up over centuries. It started around 3300 BCE in what we call the early Harappan phase. The super fertile lands around the Indus River and its tributaries made farming incredibly efficient. This massive agricultural surplus meant tribes could settle down, grow into thriving villages, and eventually, around 2600 BCE, they just exploded into these massive urban centers. This kicked off the mature Harappan phase, which was basically their absolute golden era. Section 1. The peaceful ancient utopia, a city ahead of its time. Now that we've got the timeline and the scale down, let's look at how these people actually lived. Because honestly, it looks less like the ancient world and a whole lot more like an ancient utopia. The crucial takeaway here is that they didn't just throw together a bunch of homes. They engineered master-planned cities. Think of a modern grid system. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were distinctly segmented. You had the lower mount, where the general public lived, and then the upper mount, built up on higher ground, which held public gathering spaces, marketplaces, and massive grain silos. They built boundary walls to protect against wild animals and seasonal floods. The roads were laid out in precise intersecting grid patterns, and get this, the bricks they used for their houses, they were universally standardized. Every single brick across these massive cities had the exact same dimensions. It shows an astonishing, almost modern level of top-down civic engineering. But what really truly sets them apart is their total obsession with hygiene and water management. They literally had a bathroom in the corner of every single house. And those bathrooms connected to an advanced covered underground drainage network that ran right beneath the city streets. I mean, that's a system that outpaces many global cities today. They even put public dustbins on the side of the roads. They built incredible monumental structures like the Great Bath in Mohenjo-Daro, an 897 square foot brick pool used for religious and social activities, complete with its own changing rooms. And over in Dolavira, they engineered these complex solar reservoirs and water channels to capture and store river and rainwater, basically drought-proofing their city. But you know what's even crazier? It's what archaeologists did not find. In this massive, wealthy society covering over 1 million square kilometers, there is zero evidence of a standing army. Literally no weapons of war have ever been uncovered. There are no grand palaces for egotistical kings, and no massive temples for organized, hierarchical religion. Instead, all the evidence points to a remarkably equal society that deeply respected nature. We see this through artifacts like the famous Pashupati seal, which depicts a figure sitting in a yoga posture surrounded by animals, and widespread imagery of tree, snake, and even unicorn worship. It's this baffling, entirely peaceful anomaly in human history. Moving on to Section 2, Global Trade and Daily Life. So without war or conquest eating up all their time and resources, what were they doing? How did they build this immense wealth? Well, they were building an ancient corporate empire. This was a society of hardcore innovators and global merchants. They were actually the very first people in the world to cultivate, spin, and weave cotton for clothing. They were also master artisans. Just look at stunning bronze sculptures, like the famous dancing girl idol. It shows a culture that really valued art, music, and entertainment. And they weren't just trading with the village next door. They established massive global trade networks, reaching all the way out to Mesopotamia, where the Indus Valley was known as Meluha. They were exporting huge volumes of cotton, timber, sesame oil, and lapis lazuli. To keep this vast economic engine running without a hitch, they used highly precise, standardized weights and specific carved stone seals that essentially acted as brand logos for their merchants. Which brings us to Section 3, the uncrackable ancient code. This is the most frustrating yet totally fascinating part of our whole explainer. It is the massive brick wall in our investigation. Because despite unearthing their cities, their art, and their trade routes, we still cannot read a single word of their writing. To understand why we are so stuck, we have to look at how we've decoded other ancient languages. Take ancient Egypt, for example. The only reason we understand Egyptian hieroglyphs today is because archaeologists discovered the Rosetta Stone, a bilingual tablet that had the same exact text written in both unknown Egyptian and known ancient Greek. It was the ultimate historical Google Translate. The brutal reality for the Indus Valley Civilization? Despite over a century of searching, we have never found an Indus Rosetta Stone. We literally have no translation key. And, as you can see here, this illustrates the sheer complexity of the linguistic puzzle we're up against. We can't just substitute letters and crack the code because it's not an alphabet. Unlike English, where letters like A, B, or C mean nothing on their own until you combine them, the Indus script appears to be logosyllabic. Think ancient Chinese. This means every single unique sign or symbol represents an entirely distinct word, meaning, or sound. It's like a giant puzzle with no picture on the box. Which makes this number incredibly daunting. 400. That is the staggering number of distinct, unknown symbols and signs that researchers have painstakingly cataloged across thousands of recovered artifacts. Now, while we can't actually read the script, intense study of these 400 symbols has given up a few structural secrets. For instance, by noticing how the symbols get squeezed together at the end of a line, experts figured out it was written from right to left. The symbols themselves are wonderfully bizarre. Stick figures, fish, turtles, crabs, birds, unicorns. And they're almost always accompanied by a beautifully engraved portrait of a large animal, like a rhino, a tiger, or a bull. What's even wilder is that these aren't carved into giant stone monuments. They're mostly found on these tiny little stone trade seals, barely 2.5 centimeters wide. Today, scholars passionately debate what it is. Is it an early form of Sanskrit? Is it rooted in Dravidian? Or, as some researchers like Steve Farmer have suggested, what if it's not a spoken language at all, but rather a complex system of political or religious symbols? The desperation to figure this out is so real. In fact, a state government in India recently offered a 1 million rupee bounty, that's 10 lakh, to absolutely anyone in the world who can definitively crack the Indus script. The silence of the Indus Valley is still one of history's most lucrative, active cold cases. And that brings us to Section 4, the sudden, unexplained vanishing. We've talked about their incredible rise, their brilliance, and their totally silent script. Now we have to pivot to the final and undoubtedly most chilling mystery of this explainer. How is society this successful, this vast, and this remarkably peaceful just vanished? Because the archaeological record paints a really grim picture, starting around 1900 BCE, moving into what we call the late Harappan phase. Things just go dark. That meticulous city planning that defined them, suddenly abandoned. Those advanced underground sewers clogged up and went totally unmaintained. The sacred Great Bath was actually filled with trash. Their booming global trade connections with Mesopotamia were completely severed. By 1700 BCE, these magnificent, bustling metropolitan centers were basically empty ghost towns, and by 1300 BCE, the entire civilization was just gone. So, what the heck triggered this rapid collapse? Well, with no written records to tell us the story, historians are fiercely divided, mainly circling around four major theories. Theory 1. Devastating climate change. Shifts in monsoon patterns might have caused those vital rivers to just dry up, leading to total agricultural collapse, mass starvation, and forcing survivors to migrate away toward the Ganges. Theory 2. Massive natural disasters. Think catastrophic earthquakes or uncontrollable megafloods that simply washed these great cities away. Theory 3 proposes an uncontrollable, deadly pandemic that swept quickly through the dense urban populations. And finally, Theory 4. The Aryan invasion. Some theorize that nomadic tribes from the western mountains invaded, and because these Indus people were so peaceful, no weapons, no standing army, they were just easily slaughtered or driven out. Ultimately, the true cause is a total mystery, still buried in the mud right alongside their undeciphered script. But the story of the Indus Valley leaves us with a pretty haunting realization, doesn't it? We are looking at a society that totally mastered urban living, prioritized public health, embraced peace over warfare, and generated immense, unimaginable wealth across over 1 million square miles. Yet they collapsed into ruin and were entirely forgotten by humanity for millennia. It begs a really provocative question that I want to leave you with today. If a society that advanced, that successful, and that massive can vanish almost without a trace, what does that mean for the fragility of the world we've built today? Think about that for a second. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.